My name is Sandip Soli. I'm an attorney with the Real Property Law Group. I'm a hospitality attorney, and one of my duties is to serve on the advisory network for the Washington Restaurant Association and the Washington Lodging Association. Typically, in a new lease, you're going to deal with a whole list of issues to enter into the lease. Obviously, rent, the length of the term, whether you have options to renew, maintenance responsibilities. Signage is very important, obviously, for restaurant and retail. And then finally, the personal guarantee that you may be asked to sign to guarantee the rent payments. Those are the top sort of issues that we usually run into and need to negotiate on behalf of our clients.
So let's say we went through all that and we have a lease, and now I'm in the middle of my lease and things are not going well. How should I be prepared to deal with a lease that didn't turn out to be the best negotiation or it isn't working for me?
Typically what you want to do, you're definitely locked into a written document that holds your feet to the fire. Hopefully the personal guarantee is not too extensive, but often they are. And so if you haven't limited the personal guarantee, you do face substantial exposure to the rent that you may owe in the balance of the lease. That said, the landlord has a duty to mitigate damages, and that is to find another tenant. And so as quickly as possible, you need to put the onus on the landlord to find a new tenant. If the landlord's not doing that, then you need to probably find a broker to find a new tenant to replace you and to take over the balance of the lease, or otherwise to negotiate a new lease with the landlord and cut off your liability under that lease.
What are some of, maybe name 3 of the biggest deal breakers that you've seen on the landlord side?
A deal breaker for a landlord is if, for example, there's a lot of noise. For example, I'd say it's a mixed-use complex, and there's a lot of noise or odors. Those are really big issues for landlords that deal with office tenants above, residential tenants above that are complaining about a restaurant. So that's a real big deal breaker. But for the most part, in those types of mixed-use buildings, the restaurant is more of an amenity. They get most of their rent from an office tenant or from residential tenants. And so as long as you can keep up with the amenity and not disturb the office and residential tenants, it will not be a deal breaker. So that's a big issue for landlords. The other one is frankly just paying the rent. The landlord is charging you rent. If you're not able to make the rent payments, that is a deal breaker, obviously. That's the most basic issue in a lease for the landlord.
What about the other way around? What's something that a landlord would do that would break the lease? So I, as a restaurateur, could say, you did this, I'm out of the lease.
Some things that do happen, and you definitely need to plan in the lease ahead of time to make sure you don't cut your remedies off. We've seen lots of issues where, frankly, the utilities don't work, whether it's water, electricity, or sewer. There's a lot of issues that can come up and can completely be disastrous to a restaurant. Power failures, plumbing failures, sewer failures. Those things aren't often talked about, but those things can really break a deal, and people aren't going to come back when they have to suffer through some of those things, especially customers, and then you're out of business for a while. So those are definitely things that you need to look out for. Make sure you're protected in a lease or otherwise by insurance. Those are complete deal breakers.
What are things to do to prepare to be in a good position to renegotiate a lease that you like?
Well, definitely, it's when you've been in a lease and you've got a good relationship with the landlord, you need to keep that relationship going. It's not quite a partnership, but you are definitely paying rent, and it's helping the landlord. If it's been successful, you don't want to get taken advantage of course. So you definitely have to keep up the relationship, make sure it's fair, it's equitable, and work that relationship first and foremost. If you think it's going to be a negotiation and not so much a fair one, then you probably need to study the market and make sure that either through a broker or otherwise you understand what your options are if you need to go somewhere else. And so you need to know what the market rent is and what you should negotiate at your present site. Certainly there's some cost to the landlord with getting a new tenant, whether it's brokerage fees or having to build out a space for a new tenant. And so you could bring that to the landlord and say, well, I'm going to save you money by staying here, because you're not going to have to pay brokerage fees. You're not going to have to pay to reconfigure the space for a new tenant. And so definitely there could be some savings below market for you to provide to the landlord.